welcome everybody. Thanks for being here on this Sunday. We're so happy that you're here.
Yeah.
And I'm so excited to talk to you, Brooke. Brooke, if you've read her other work, she does these incredible beachy historical fiction bestsellers, and they've captured the hearts of so many people, and they're full of these just emotionally rich characters, and they explore such deep and meaningful things. So I'm really excited to chat with you about it, and then to open it up for questions to hear if any of you have things you'd like to ask Brooke too. But I guess, can you first start off by telling us a little bit about Our Last Vineyard Summer? This is her newest book, which just released
July 1st.
July 1st.
So first I want to say thank you so much for coming and interviewing me. So Annalise was sweet enough to choose my book for her July book club pick. She runs a book club called Who to Judge, right? That's what it's called. And she makes amazing book recommendations, as I might say myself. But no, she drove 2 hours to be here, so thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So Our Last Vineyard Summer is my 4th novel. It is probably the book that is nearest and dearest to my heart, although I think I've said that about every single book I've come out with. Because each time you come out with one, you're just like, it's your baby that you're putting out into the world. But this one is a dual timeline historical novel that is set in 1965, the summer of 1965, and the summer of 1978. It's about a Washington political family who have a beach house in Edgartown on Martha's Vineyard, and the father, who's a United States Senator, passes away a year before the book begins. And the mother is, who is this I kind of modeled her after an iconic feminist, like a Gloria Steinem-like character, named Virgie, calls her 3 grown daughters back to the beach house and says, "Daddy left us in a bad way. We need to sell the house." And as the sisters are packing up the beach house, they uncover all of these family secrets and things that, you know, they didn't realize was going on in their parents' marriage and in their lives, that force them to reckon with who they are as a family, who they really are as sisters, what their parents' marriage was like, and kind of gives them a whole new lens to look at their childhood all over again. I would say it's a beach read, but it's a beach read with teeth. There's a lot going on in this story. It's not just a light and fluffy story, even though the cover would kind of make you believe that in many ways because it's so full of fun. But it really is about summer and the transformational summer, and you know, the ways in which we can self-examine and evolve and change throughout those like warm, exciting summer months. So I hope that captured it.
Oh my gosh, of course it did. I want to get into all those things that you mentioned, those little tidbits. But first, I'd love to ask you just about what inspired this book and, you know, the spark behind it.
Yeah, totally. That's my favorite question when I'm talking to authors, because I love hearing the origin stories of people's novels, because they always come, as a creative, you get your ideas from so many random places, honestly. But with this book, I was in Martha's Vineyard. We were there, we go every summer for a couple weeks, and we've rented houses all over the island. And I don't know how many of you know anything about Martha's Vineyard, but it is a pretty big island. There are 5 major towns, and each town kind of has its own personality and flavor. And Edgartown is probably the poshest. If Martha's Vineyard could be posh, it is the poshest town. It is picture postcard perfect. There are white planked houses with perfect, tidy black and green shutters. I think I was telling you that, you know, Essex green, the Benjamin Moore paint color, is the official shutter color in Martha's Vineyard. You know, everything matches. There's white picket fences and hydrangeas growing up arbors, and it's a really beautiful place on the Edgartown Harbor. And we happened to be renting a house in that neighborhood for the first time one summer, and I brought my dog with us that summer. We had a puppy, and we would get up early. I would get up early to walk the dog, and it was sort of before the rest of the town woke up. And when I was walking through these alleys and these little cobblestone roads or bricked sidewalks, my imagination just started going, and I started thinking about who are the families that get to live in these houses in the summer, and why has Edgartown and Martha's Vineyard, not just Edgartown, Martha's Vineyard in general, been so connected to Washington and the political world for so long? You know, from the time, we saw the Kennedys rounding the island in their sailboat, it's the Cape and the islands have really captured our imagination and captured the interest of so many politicians. So you go there even now, and you may see, you know, the motorcade drive by. To this day, I just saw the Obamas there like a couple weeks ago. And so I just started thinking about the connection of this island with Washington, and I started picturing a family and living in one of these houses. In my mind, I love going back in time. I love going back to the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. So my mind immediately went back in time, and I thought about how it's such a timeless place and how things change all over the world, but Martha's Vineyard sort of stays the same. It looks the same, and the way I was walking down these streets right now, people were doing in the 60s. They were walking down the same streets. Nothing really looks all that different. And so I started thinking about a family, and it was very vague, this political family, and how I would love to tell the story of the lives of a family who lived in one of these houses over many summers. And the idea started to percolate, and then I started to think about three sisters. I'm one of three sisters, so having three daughters in a family. And then, you know, the week kind of marches on, and I might have been at the farmer's market, and I'm thinking about, you know, where the corn was grown, and just like thinking all about the connections of this island. And there was one day that I was in the sunroom of the house that we were renting, and it had this giant antique map on the wall that was super cool to look at. And it was how all the towns used to connect in the, you know, probably 50 years before I was there. And I remember looking down, and I saw the cartographer's name was Charles Whiting. And it's very strange the way you're sort of struck by the creative, you know, why creativity strikes you at different moments. But when I saw that name, I immediately knew they were the Whiting family. They were going to be the Whiting sisters. Charlie Whiting was going to be the United States Senator. I didn't have Virgie's name yet, Virginia, we call her Virgie for short. She was the last name that came to me, but they began to crystallize as a family, and I immediately thought about the pain and the nostalgia you would feel if you were going to have to let go of one of these iconic homes in this really beautiful town. So that was sort of the beginning, and from there, you know, it takes many months to really figure out the story. So I didn't know everything, but I knew a lot more, and what I had was that pitter-patter, the excitement you start to feel as a writer when you know you have your next idea. And so then I sat down and I just started to write and find the story. And I did know what the end was going to be. I never write without knowing sort of the beginning, middle, and end. Otherwise, I would really be in a dark room with a flashlight trying to figure out where I was going. But I really did do a lot through discovery. And so I did find out more about these sisters and the mother and father just by writing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk about the sisters, the Whiting sisters, because you, like you said, you're one of three, and I feel like you write so powerfully about sisterhood in Our Last Vineyard Summer, and then also for People Magazine, you had an essay that was just beautiful. And so I just wanted to ask, you know, how your personal experiences shaped the sisters we see in the book, and then, you know, how you went about developing those characters as individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good question. Okay, so I'll tell you first just a little bit about the sisters in the book. So when you first meet them, they're teenagers. The youngest, Betsy, is around 12, and then the oldest is around 16. So they're much younger in 1965 when you first meet them. And Louisa is the oldest one, and she sort of is the responsible one. There's a lot of birth order stuff in here that you'll recognize. Betsy, the youngest one, is sort of like the most playful, and she's sort of like hanging out with this little boy across the harbor, across Edgartown Harbor a lot. And Aggie is more of the athletic one, and she's very much you know, the connector between the older and younger sister. And in the latter timeline, when the sisters meet up, you can tell from the very first or second chapter that there's some tension between them, that it's not everything is perfect in Whiting sisterhood. There's from the first minute that Betsy walks in the door and her older sister is there, her sister's making lemonade, and there's just a tension in the way this, you know, she's stirring it, and the way the spoon gets put down, and the way that, you know, Betsy's kind of grabbing at the peanut butter and saying, what are you trying to say? You know, there's just, you sense that tension right away. And that comes from being a sister, right? That tension, the push and pull of sisterhood, of being so incredibly close, being so incredibly competitive, you know, loving and hating that person in your life is a very normal feeling for many of us. You know, there are perfect sisters out there. I've met them on my book tour where they're like, we never fight. And I'm like, well, that's not my family, because in my family, we are so incredibly close until we're not. And you know, a week before this book came out, my younger sister decided to stop talking to me. And I was like, oh my God, I'm putting a book out about sisters and my sister's not talking to me. And that's what I ended up writing the People magazine article about, because they asked me to write an essay about sisters. And I'm like, how can I lie and tell some, you know, fantasy story about our lives? Like, this is what sisterhood is. And there's a famous saying that's like, when you have a sister, it's like looking into the mirror and seeing everything you adore and everything you abhor about yourself at the same moment. And so I really tried to capture that fierce love between these characters that I felt for my own sisters, but also the way some of that just goes up in smoke at times for reasons that are often not understood by both sides. You know, there's a lot of complications in families. We all carry so much baggage in our lives. And the way we're raised and the way that our parents treat us, or our roles in the family, it stays with us through a lifetime. And so when they're making this lemonade in the kitchen and you think it's this innocent thing, you know, the most like benign statement like, oh, I'm surprised you're here, is a dagger, you know? And so I play with that a lot in the story. But I also wanted this to be a story where these sisters could heal. You know, that's what we all really want. All we want in our lives is to really be close to our siblings. It's just that sometimes it can be really hard. And so I sort of get in the trenches with them as they're figuring out how to be close again as adults, and what that might look like now that their lives are so different, especially now that the father has passed away. You know, in this particular family, there's an idea that the mother, Virgie, favored one child and the father favored the other child. And whether it's true or not doesn't matter, because it's the belief system in the family. And so all of that is sort of played out. But yes, I would say these characters are nothing like my sisters. I am the middle. So I am sort of that ping pong between my older and younger sister. And sometimes that gets me into trouble, because as you know, you're relaying stuff to try to make peace with one, then they're mad at you for what you're saying, you know, so I'm sort of used to being that negotiator in my family. But yeah, so I do think that this was such a hard book for me to write in many ways, because I had to really come clean about the pain I felt as a sister as much as the real reward I felt. And I think that comes through because a lot of sisters come up to me afterwards and they're like, let me tell you about my sister. And I'm like, okay.
No, for sure. I wanted to talk about Virgie a little bit, because not only is there the relationship with the sisters, but you mentioned that it's dual point of view, which is Betsy, the youngest sister, and Virgie, their mother. And then it's also across the two timelines of 1965 and 1978. And Virgie being this Gloria Steinem type figure, how did that element of her shape her role in the novel, and then those themes of feminism, and how did you explore that with the family through her?
Yeah, okay, that's a really good question too. So
A couple questions.
I know. I'm like, where do I begin? I'll just talk about Virgie. So Virgie is my favorite character, because she is somebody who, I feel like I was telling you this once, Annalise, that, you know, as a mother, as someone who is a very, you know, I believe in teaching my daughter to be a strong, empowered woman, and my son as well, who's 15, not to be a strong, empowered woman, but to be strong and empowered and think of women in a very respectful way. I just started to worry, like, is this gonna backfire on me? I feel like I told you that once, like, is my son or is my daughter gonna look at me someday and be like, okay, enough, like, I get it, like, I get the sexism thing, I get the double standards, mom, like, move on, you know? And so I thought about, if Gloria Steinem had been your mom, you know, this is somebody who is an icon of the feminist movement, who has put out many of the ideas that many of us believe in today. You know, what if she had been your mother and she was spoon feeding you a lot of those ideas as three girls in a family? Would all of you swallow it and believe in it, or would some of you push back? And I think the way I saw these particular girls, my characters, is that the older sister would immediately rise like the good soldier. And the youngest daughter would sort of feel a little more conflicted by some of these ideas. And I think she begins to not push back where she doesn't believe in being a strong, empowered woman, but she's more questioning, what does it mean to be a strong, empowered woman? It's not, is it that you're becoming the CEO of a company? Or is it that you're finding an inner strength in who you are? Is it that you have the, you know, the confidence, that same idea, or is it that you're going to the moon? And I think those questions are really important to ask each and, you know, within ourselves. Even today, I ask myself all the time, you know, what is really important in terms of what I'm teaching my daughter? And so in the book, as the story goes on, Betsy really starts asking these questions of her mother and getting her mother to kind of dig in with her about some of these ideas. And by the end, and I'm not giving it away, but by the end, you start to see that Betsy thinks she's such a disappointment to her mother because she thinks she's not sort of that CEO or the astronaut, right, going to the moon. And instead, she's somebody who, you know, wants something a little different. And when her mother says, oh, no, you misunderstood what I meant by feminism. Feminism is about being able to make choices. Feminism is about being able to be the CEO or be a mom. You get to choose. And I think it's a really powerful moment, at least in my mind, of the story, because that's really true, right? And in the end, that's what I want my daughter to take away. And that's what I want my readers to take away, is that what's important is that we have choice, right? And so, and by choice, I'm not using the politically loaded phrase. I just mean choices in our own lives. And so, yeah, so Virgie to me was somebody who was very, you know, she has this column that she's writing where she's trying to, you know, empower women to go to parent-teacher get their husbands to go to parent-teacher conferences, because back then that was considered taboo, right? Men didn't go to a parent-teacher conference. You know, getting women to say, hey, maybe a couple of nights a week you should cook dinner, which back in 1965 was a bizarro thought, right? Bizarro thought. But she's just pushing the envelope a little bit. And then when the girls are older, they do really have it within their minds, and they are very strong, even if they think they're sort of conflicted. So I don't know, I sort of had some fun with that. But I'm forgetting your question because I just started talking about my love of Virgie as a character. But what was your second question? Because I know you asked a second question within all that.
Really asking how the relationship between Virgie and Betsy kind of developed over those 2 summers, which isn't how I worded it.
Yeah.
But kind of how that develops, and then how that impacts and contributes to those themes of feminism and womanhood and these journeys that they're both on, and separate timelines, but also kind of at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I sort of touched on that because I was just showing that when they're, you know, all these ideas she was perpetuating in the first timeline in 1965 when she's young, then when she's older in the second timeline, when Betsy's older, the youngest daughter's older, she's sort of pushing back. But writing dual timeline from 2 different points of view is actually really, really challenging and tricky but it's also very, very rewarding to read, I think, as a reader, and to write as a writer, because you're dropping all these Easter eggs in both timelines and getting to get a really rich and deep portrait of the family. So by the time you are, you know, in the present day timeline, which is 1978, it's not really present day, you sort of already know this family. There's this iconic scene in the book where the father challenges them all, because he's alive in the 1965 timeline. The United States Senator Father Charlie comes to visit, and he challenges them all to swim out to this far buoy. And in many ways, the scene encapsulates a lot of what goes on in the family in the book, because, you know, the father has the older daughter and the middle daughter really revved up to go, and the middle daughter is determined to beat the older daughter, and the younger daughter is determined to beat the middle and the older daughter, and they all start swimming. And the little girl starts struggling, Betsy, and the mother has to sort of stop and not be as part of not take it as seriously as the rest of them, because she has to help Betsy and pull back. And then the oldest daughter loses to the second, you know, so it's like all of these dynamics in the 2 timelines end up culminating in that scene, because they really are pushing and fighting and scrambling against each other, even though they all come back to the same house and they all eat dinner together and they're all laughing and smiling. There's some stuff that happens in those quiet moments in our lives. And so those dual timelines they're so tricky and so fun to write at the same time.
I wanted to actually ask, because I thought this was so interesting the first time we talked about it, if you would share a little bit about your writing process in terms of that doing a dual timeline and dual point of view, how you kind of
Yes, did it.
did
yeah.
that.
I know, it is really tricky. So my first 2 books were not dual timeline, and then my 3rd novel was dual timeline. And I wrote it mostly because I love to read it. I love reading dual timeline. But then when you're doing it, basically what you're doing is you're writing 2 novels, and you're cutting them, like you're condensing them so much so they can both fit in one book. Because both, when you read a multi-timeline novel, you're really reading 2 totally different, narrative arcs. You're looking at the characters in a totally different point in time. And so what I did was I wrote the first few chapters to begin, and in the 1978 timeline. And then when you get to the next timeline, I wrote a couple of those chapters, but then I had to just stop and not keep going back and forth. And I had to actually separate them into 2 different books in a way, and write forward in one and write forward in the other timeline, and then splice them together. And that was the way that I was able to sort of manage it. This is particularly challenging because it was 2 different characters' points of view as well. It was dual POV, they call that. And so it was shifting entirely from Betsy's lens, the youngest daughter, to the mother's lens. And I think that in a family story, that makes it even more powerful, because I think when you just have your one narrator, they can be pretty unreliable. Because we all can be in the same situation as a family and interpret the same moment entirely differently, right? So, when we look at childhood photos in my home and we're laughing about a story, we all remember it a little differently. And so I love the idea in this book of going then to the mother's point of view and seeing how she sees it. Because, we all have these moments where we blame our mothers for things, right? And we hold them accountable for things that went wrong in our lives, or maybe even our own failings, or things that we feel are our own failings. But then our mother might say to us, but I did that for you. I made these choices for you. And that comes through in the book, because there are moments where Betsy, the youngest daughter, sort of feels like her mother was so wrapped up in her career in this political movement that she lost out on some really important moments with her mother. And her mother was like, but I was doing this all for you. When you get in Virgie's point of view, the mother's point of view, you understand that she really was. But you can't see that as a daughter. And so those kind of missed connections are also throughout the story. So yeah.
You've talked quite a bit about the this exploration of identity that all of the characters, I feel like, are going through, especially in their grief after losing their father. I feel like Martha's Vineyard and their home was almost a character in its own right. And I was just wondering how you utilized the home and what the characters learn about home and senses of place throughout the book, and kind of how you wove that in.
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so let me think. So when I was thinking a lot about summer homes and the way they carry different types of memories for us. It's a more limited amount of time. I didn't grow up with a summer home, but I grew up in a beach home. Like, our house that we lived in year round was 168 steps down a cliff to the beach out on Eastern Long Island. And so I grew up very connected to that, being out on the beach and kind of walking in nature and feeling that connection to water. And so the idea of home really making you who you are is something I really have always believed in. And I think that's because where I grew up and the way I grew up really has made me who I am. And as I went out into the world as a journalist and interviewed so many people, and they would talk about home, you could see the way it shaped you, shaped them in really important ways. And so the idea of this family home that was so happy, and it was like a place that beckoned you back every summer, and you had your best memories there, to then revisit that as an adult and see it with mature eyes and fresh eyes and the grown-ups' eyes, and thinking back to a lot of those moments in your family in a new way, especially after the loss of your father, it just fascinates me. I have a friend who, when she went to pack up her mom's house after her mother died, she found a stack of her mother's diaries. And she just thought, should I read these or should I not? And I was all for reading them, because I feel like if you could learn about your mother, the human being, that's such a gift. Like, our mothers are who they are to us, and they're so special. But do we really ever know them as people, real people who had heartbreaks and crushes and, you know, troubles that maybe they hid from us because to protect us? And I think it's the journalist in me. I was like, I would totally want to read it. And she was like, I don't know if I can. And I was like, why don't you try reading them, but stop if it starts to feel uncomfortable. You know, then you know it wasn't really meant for your eyes, that particular entry. So anyway, so I do think as we revisit some of our childhood places and these, you know, towns or islands or summer communities that have shaped us, we do get a greater sense of wisdom about who we are and where we come from. And I think as you get a little older, you know, as someone of turning 50 in December, you know, as you get older, you look for those places to anchor you. You want to reconnect with those parts of yourselves often that you maybe have grown away from or out of, but still feel like a very big part of you. You know, it may sound silly, but when we were on Martha's Vineyard this past summer, my son who's 15, and you know, 15-year-old boys are like, you know, not always the most like giving of feelings and emotion. And my son looked at me and he said, you know, when I have kids, I'm gonna bring them back to Martha's Vineyard. And I was like, oh. It just made me so happy because I'm like, you get this connection to the sense of place that I feel, you know, and you get the same sense of beauty and grandeur and inspiration when you're here. And we all have those places in our lives. That just happens to be mine. And when I sit in the horrible New York winter all year, you know, throughout those like 4 or 5 months, and I can be in Martha's Vineyard in summer in my mind on my laptop, I'm always gonna choose Martha's Vineyard. So that is why so my first book was set in Martha's Vineyard in 1962, and my next 2 books were the Hamptons, so East Hampton and Southampton, but in 1957 on Gin Lane, and then the other one was Dual Timeline, also in the 60s and 70s. So yeah, so I love going to these old beach towns, or these current beach towns, but going back in time in them. And wherever I go, if it's a beach town, they're always like, your next one should be here, like down in Rehoboth. They were like, we have a really interesting history. I'm like, you too. And Pawleys Island, Litchfield in South Carolina, they were like, you have to do a Pawleys Island book. I was like, I might, I don't know. But yeah.
I feel like the cover really captures the nostalgia and all the
Yes.
feelings behind it. I love the cover. I hope
So beautiful.
everyone does. I know that there's a really cool story behind it though, so I'd love
Okay,
to hear.
I think my books all have, you guys have to, if you don't know my 3 other books, you should look at the covers because they all have these really gorgeous vintage looking covers. But okay, so for this book, I was actually on Martha's Vineyard last summer when they sent me the first cover, and the first cover they sent for this book was so bad. It like sent a chill up my. It was horrible. It was so I can't confirm this is true, but I get the sense that publishers, design departments are so inundated that sometimes maybe they're using some AI cover generating help. And this cover they sent me to me felt like that. It was like 2 women from the back sitting on a beach. It could have been any book in this whole book. Like it could have been any summer book. It did not feel like my book at all. But it just felt like a little bit pixelated. It didn't feel authentic. It didn't feel like there was real emotion and connection. It just didn't read like something that should be my book cover. And I was so terrified to like push back because it's the worst feeling as an author. You know, it doesn't matter how big of a name you have as an author, you're always like, thank you, sir, for publishing my book. So you just hate pushing back. So I was like, but I emailed my agent. I was like, what do you think of this? I really don't like it. She's like, I don't like it either. So I sent a note to my editor and she said, oh, don't worry about it. We'll try again. So I'm like, oh, good. So then they send me another cover 3 weeks later. And this cover was worse. Oh my God. It was so bad. So it was, I keep joking that, you remember that old comic, Kathy?
Yeah.
Okay, it looked like the woman from Kathy, and from the back, and it was like an English Tudor style home on a moody looking British looking cliff with like a Kathy and 2 of her friends from the back walking across the lawn, and I was like, this is not Martha's Vineyard. This looks like Ireland or England, or like, I'm like, this is so bad. So I'm like, okay, I just at that point I gave up. I was like, you know what? This isn't working for me either. I'm gonna send you guys some ideas. And this particular photo is a really, it's a photo I've always loved. You can order it on One Kings Lane, art.com. It's in black and white. and I sent it to my editor along with like 10 other possible images, and I just said, this is more of like the energy I was thinking. I feel like it has to be something that captures, you know, the joy of summer, but also shows like, you know, something that felt like summer, not like a dark, you know, Cliffs of Ireland. So they actually took one of those images, which was the black and white version of this, and they colorized it, and they sent it back to me in two possibles. So it was like one with a darker blue with red writing, and then more of like a lighter color with the blue writing. And we all just jumped on this cover because we loved it so much. If you think that the water can't look like this in Martha's Vineyard, I swear to you, I can show you a photo on my Instagram feed. Look at it. It's a picture of me and my husband coming in on the ferry. It may not be quite this aqua, it's maybe like a tinge, like not as light, but it really does, the water there at certain angles when the light hits it gets very light like this, and it's one of the things I love about the island there. So anyway, so then we went with that cover. But with my first book, Summer Darlings, can you hold it? Can I grab a copy? Because this is such a fun story. So with this one, you want to hold it? No, I'll just talk about this one really quick because I think this one's the most fun. So this was my first book on Martha's Vineyard, and when it was hardcover, but it was still the same cover image. But when it came back to me for the first time, this tile was this icky brown. Okay, this was like an orange lounge chair. Oh, can you imagine anyone buying brown tile in an orange lounge chair? Then these flowers were tropical plants. I was like, this is Martha's Vineyard. There's no tropical plants. So I went back to them and I said, okay, we need to like please work on the icky brown. The image itself is great. We need to put hydrangeas in, so you can see they can do magic. These I'm just amazed by these art directors. And then they did the most fun thing. They said, okay, we're gonna give you 4 possible choices of the color of her bathing suit. So they gave me a copy of the cover that was royal blue bathing suit. There was a pretty aubergine. There was an emerald green, and then there was this red. And so I printed all 4 out and I put them on the front walkway of my house, and I was waving my neighbors over and I'm like, which one would you buy at the bookstore? And everyone picked red. And I was like, okay, it's definitely gotta be red. So you get to have a lot of fun with your covers as an author. It's not true for every publisher, but my publisher tends to be they always give you a say. With my second book, Anjin Lane, they gave me 12 choices. We narrowed it down to 2 and all settled on the same one once they did some rejiggering of things. So I don't think that's true for everyone, but my publisher Gallery, it's an imprint with Simon & Schuster. They've been wonderful with covers. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's a great lesson in advocating for yourself. You said you were like scared to say it, but I'm so glad that you did, because I adore your covers, both of your covers. I mean,
so
I think
cute,
all of them have just been so perfect and really captured the essence of the book. But it got me thinking about the research that they should do about Martha's Vineyard and what it was like in the hydrangea.
Yes.
But what kind of research do you do writing historical fiction? How do you kind of dive in and make sure, we talked a little bit about like the details, but how do you make sure that everything is historically
okay, so this is where my background as a journalist, because I was a journalist for 20 years, really comes into play. I can kind of go down the rabbit hole of research very easily because I love that part of it, and I love talking to people and interviewing people. So, you know, I call historic societies and I interview some of the people there. For my book Anjin Lane, I was talking to people who had memories of being kids in the Hamptons when they were little, because the Hamptons now can be terrible at times in parts, but back in the 50s and 60s it was pretty magical. It was very bohemian. It wasn't at all like it is today. There were potato fields rather than, you know, giant mansions everywhere. So I do that. I do a lot of reading of magazine articles that were published back in the time periods that I'm writing in. You know, the 50s and 60s are so hilarious to go back and read the women's magazines. I mean, the articles like how to keep your husband happy when he gets home from work, and it was like, give him a foot massage, make sure the fire is going, you know, and it's real advice, you know, from back then. So I love reading that stuff. So getting into the mindset of these characters, I watch movies from the time period, you know, like I always joke that at the beginning of every novel I watch Roman Holiday, because I just love getting back into the mode of those time periods. What else do? I listen to music from that time period. Yeah, I read everything that I can. So I have like this, to balance out my like trashy Cosmo reading from the 60s, I have like a New Yorker compendium of articles that were published in the 50s and 60s. And that's actually really helpful because you see what people were talking about and how they were talking about it. You know, not only do I have to know where they were shopping for groceries on Martha's Vineyard in 1978, I have to know if they go in 1965 and wash their hands, that they might have actually used Dove. Like Dove existed in the 20s, right? But like I need to know that. So every little detail has to be checked. You have to know, you know, one of the assumptions I made with Anjan Lane was that phone numbers were phone numbers in the 1950s until I started, you know, fact checking and doing all my research. No, in Eastern Long Island in the 1950s, phone numbers were 5 digits long. You know, so if I put a 7-digit phone number, I'm gonna really get things wrong. So you have to go through and fact check every single thing. So what I end up doing with my manuscripts is we have something called first pages, and they come back to us from the copy editor with all sorts of, you know, questions and grammatical things they want to ask you. And I usually go through with a highlighter, just like I would have in college or with a journalism article, and I just highlight everything that I need to check. One of the things I caught at the very last minute, oh thank God I caught it with our last Vineyard Summer, because things keep you awake at night because you're so scared you're gonna mess up, and then get an email from someone telling you, you know, oh actually in Martha's Vineyard in 1970, and you're like, no. They go to Nantucket in the book for 2 or 3 very pivotal chapters in the story. And I just assumed, you can never assume as a historical fiction writer, that they left out of Hyannis on the Cape, which is where you leave out of now to go to Nantucket, to go to the ferry. But it turns out the ferries were all, to Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket back in 1965, were all from the same terminal in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, which when you hear that, you're like, not a big deal, but it is a big deal because I'm taking you back in time and I'm promising you that as a writer that I'm gonna show you what this world was like accurately during this time period, so that any little bit that's wrong can take you out of the story. And so historical fiction writers, we work really hard to make sure that we never do that in the story. So 15. Yeah, so we should take questions.
Yeah, I was like, okay, great. Yeah, well, I guess one more before we turn it over, but I guess what would be one thing that you hope that readers will take away from the book? I know there's so many, but...
There's so many. I think that it's okay to come from an imperfect family. I think there's a lot of pressure on us to feel like our families are like what we see in the TV shows. And I don't mean that in the sense that we're supposed to be, oh my gosh, I'm gonna date myself by saying like the Cosby Show and Family Ties, like it's the 80s, but not like that, but just this idea that, you know, when things are wrong in our families, we feel like, gosh, can I have a normal family, right? Like, but that is normal. And that's one of the things I really think is so important to remember in our lives, because we all struggle so much to love and be close to our mothers, our sisters, our brothers, our children, and so the idea that there can be healing, that you can get close again, it's all right there for us to do. It's just that the work is really, really hard. And so in reading this book, I don't know, I hope that in some ways it encourages people to think, well, maybe I shouldn't really carry what I've been carrying. You know, maybe I should let it go and let myself kind of be vulnerable again with my family. I also think it's important, particularly now, we just had lunch and we were talking a lot about this, but with social media, I think so much about my kids, especially my 10-year-old daughter, and the images that she sees. You know, she's not on social media, but the images that we let our kids see these days, and always thinking, well, we have to make sense of what they're seeing. And that's true even from back in the 60s and 70s. It's always been our job, but I think as parents it's even harder these days because we're kind of living in the wild west of media content. And so I think the more that we can contextualize for our kids what they're seeing would be really good, and really sharing our own ideas and feelings about things. And I think that's part of Virgie's failings, is that as a mother, she's so big on issue and empowerment that she forgets sometimes just to open her heart and connect to her daughter. And that's not me. I mean, if my kids were here, they would be like, oh my God, this woman, that's all she talks about is her feelings. Because I'm a writer, right? That's what I do. But I do think that good questions. You can ask anything.
This is more of just a comment. It's
Yeah.
very interesting to have you sit here and talk about doing historical research
Yeah.
during what I lived.
I'm telling you, I
And it's
know.
like, because, I grew up on the East Coast, but outside, in Maryland, like 10 miles from the White House. So
Oh,
that was the national news, local news was everybody's national news.
Yeah.
So to grow up, and the East Coast, like I remember Atlantic City, when, the Lennon sisters were on the steel pier, and, we always did beaches on, in Asbury Park, things,
Yeah.
And how things change, but talking about going back and getting the details right, and, and it's interesting, and talking about families from your perspective, from where you're at right now in
Yeah.
life.
yeah.
Because that changes as you age.
Yes.
So,
Right.
it's like, yeah, and so it's interesting.
Well, I always say if my sisters were to write, I think I said this in the People magazine article, like if they were to write the article about what it's like to be sisters, the three of us, they would write an entirely different article.
Right.
And it's true with age too. If I was writing this book when I was 22, 25, I would have wrote a completely different story. So I think for me, becoming a mother put my own mother in perspective so much for me. Things decisions she made, like she and my dad got divorced, and it was when I was 26, and it was my mom's decision. And I was so angry with her, even though they were miserable together. I was just so angry with her. And then as soon as I got married and had kids, I was like, oh my gosh, Mom, that was really brave. But I couldn't see that before. So I think
Right.
sometimes it takes being on the other side. So.
I had the same comment.
Oh.
Because it's like, I grew up during that time, so all the details that you so relentlessly research,
Yeah.
they pay off,
Yeah.
because that resonates with us as readers.
Yeah. Oh, that's so
We're
nice
like,
to know.
yes, I remember that.
Yes.
I was 12 then. I
Right.
remember that.
Right.
But
Right.
yeah, we get it.
Yeah, and I have a scene, I think it's actually in Summer Darlings, where Marilyn Monroe dies the summer that this book takes place. And all the girls are crying and they're so upset. And it came from my mom telling me that story of when she was young and she remembers Marilyn Monroe dying, and she had she knew nothing about her other than she was this famous woman, and she and her teenage friends were all crying hysterically, and she's like, it's so weird looking back on that, but it always stuck with me. And so the teenagers in this novel end up all crying over this moment, and it becomes like a cultural moment in the book that I think people who lived through that moment can really remember.
When you talk about the magazines, I remember, I can visualize these, and they were, some of them, like Life magazine was a big magazine, and
Yeah.
the pictures, and, some of these, it brings back things that you forget.
Right.
As you age, it's like, oh my gosh, and
That shaped you.
And too, what happens too when you talk about home and the place and memories, well, I've recently, for one reason or another, you're looking at places that I've lived, homes we've owned, and then places where we would go for family reunions, and that, and they basically don't exist anymore, or they're so different. So it was always a place with the people, and then those people are all gone, and so for me, we are there's nobody.
Right.
I have one aunt, and my mom only had one sister, and both of them had 7 kids each, and they probably each should have only had 2. But
Right. Right.
But that's the last. She's the last. So really, our generation is, and I'm the oldest of 7. So
Oh, wow.
and there's 16 years. So really, we have different generations within my family.
Yeah.
But myself and my youngest sister are the closest, and so the dynamic changes. And if you have a large family as you get older, and those, people, their children married, so the families grow apart just because they're so big. You
Yeah.
only have so much time,
Yeah.
and so you're focused on your group. And I think especially during COVID and the pandemic, because all of a sudden you wake up and you're like, oh no, we are those people. You're like, how did this happen?
Yeah.
Like, when they're talking about these old,
Yeah.
you're this age, you shouldn't do. I'm like, wait a minute.
You're like, wait, I didn't put myself in that
it
category
really was
until
kind of
now.
sobering. It's like,
Yeah.
darn, but it is interesting. And then you just move on. But I always tell people that surround yourself with younger people too.
Yeah.
Don't get caught up in the old things and everybody's aches and pains and what's going on. I mean, you can be aware and supportive, but you have to kind of embrace
Yeah.
what's going on, because the world sometimes feels like it's passing you by. You know, if you don't have to be in the workforce or you've been retired for a while,
Yeah.
you're not staying as current with, say, things like technology and stuff.
Yeah,
And so you
yeah.
have to, like, an AI and stuff, like,
Oh,
that's
gosh, I know.
So.
Well, that's
but-
why these book events can be so nice, because particularly for a writer, because we spend so much of our time alone writing. So I love going out and doing these events because I get to talk to people and connect with people, you know, and really it gives people a place to go and find community. And I think it's amazing. Like even your book club you started, Who to Judge, it gives people community. It's a sense of belonging. And I think that's, you know, really important. They say that
Well,
as you get
you know,
older.
I'm amazed at how many debut authors and how much writing is going on right now, despite, you know, everything else. So
Yeah.
it's promising.
Yeah.
Because you see all these people, nobody's reading books anymore. Nobody's doing, you know, it's kind of scary, like, and educated people, you know.
Yeah.
But
I think
I
that
don't know.
I think that books actually are doing better than you think. They're actually
well,
people
that's what
are
I'm saying.
reading.
Well, everybody, of course,
We
I
need
know
escape
readers.
from the world.
We
right
need an
now.
escape for the world. So
Right.
the world is very scary right
And
now.
it's still a book. I mean, I have things on advice, but I need a book.
Yeah.
Or audiobooks.
Right.
Yeah.
I love audiobooks.
And,
Yeah.
When we were talking about that at lunch, I feel like what's something so special about your book specifically is that it is a multi-generational story, and there's something for every person at every stage in their life in Our Last Vineyard Summer, and I think that it'll resonate with so many people, and has resonated with so many people. So I think that that's always really nice to read and allows for community to grow, because then you get so many more perspectives than just one time period or one age group or
Yeah.
one type of reader, I guess. So it's incredible. It's been really fun to talk about. Are there any more questions?
Yeah.
I just wanted to know if you could tell us a little bit about the moment when you completed each of your novels.
Oh my goodness, why are you completing a novel right now?
I wish.
So when I finished my first novel, I thought I was done and I wasn't done. So I worked on it for about 2 years and I sent it out to a bunch of agents, and I got so many responses from agents who wanted to read the whole thing, and I was like, oh, people act like this is so hard, this publishing thing, this is gonna be easy. And then once they read the whole novel, I got rejected by all of those agents, and it was very sobering as someone who's been writing my whole life. But as a journalist, rather than take that and, you know, just give up, I was like, oh, well, this is just like being edited. I still have work to do. So I spent 2 more years working on that novel. I was so determined to write fiction. I was somebody who, as a little girl, as a grown woman working in DC as a journalist, would go to bookstores, and I kid you not, I would run my hands over the covers of fictional novels and just long to someday write a fiction. I mean, I spent so much time sitting and listening to people's stories and writing them, and I loved every second of it. But there was a certain point where it became, I could do it in my sleep. You know, it's like any job you have when you've done it long enough. You know what the beginning quote's gonna be. I knew what the nut graph was gonna be. I could write it as I was interviewing someone, and I really wanted to flex a new muscle. And so I became determined to just get this book published. And so that's why I put in the additional time. And when I did, I sent it back out and I got an agent right away, and it sold right away. So it was just putting in that more time. So anyway, I don't really totally remember finishing this one because I feel like it went on for many years. That being said, with the next 3, they were much faster. So On Gin Lane I wrote in 1.5 years, and then the next 2 I wrote in 1 year each. And so when I finished each one, I think, oh gosh, I can't remember the other 2. I'm embarrassed to say, but I can remember with Our Last Vineyard Summer, I just remember typing the end and getting up and being like, yes, because it was out of you, you know, like it's really, these stories, these people, their voices, the plot, it lives in you for so, and I'm doing this because I really feel like it's a brain-heart connection. There's just something going on from here to here the whole time you're writing, and I become very lost in the story. I'm a disaster as a mom at 3 o'clock when I'm like trying to manage my kids' schedules. I'm like late to a birthday party because I'm really in the book. And then when I'm done, I can like completely return to my life, and things get a lot more organized again. So when I'm done, I feel such a sense of I just feel lighter because it's out of you. It's like, and I've felt that way even as a journalist writing an article. When you know what you're trying to get out on the page, and you're working, and when you get to that point where it's done, and you really feel it. So like a lot of times people will say, how do you know you're done? You know when you're done because you can feel it in your bones. It doesn't mean you're not going to revise it some more. It just means you know the story's there. You know the characters have an arc. You know that the dialogue is working. You know, enough is there that like I can send it to my editor and I know she's gonna buy it. You know, you just feel it. And I think that's probably come from writing 4 novels. Because it definitely didn't come with Summer Darling. That one was like my learning book, you know. Yeah.
Are you working on your next novel?
I am, yeah. So my next novel is about, okay, funny enough, it's about 2 sisters, but I swear it's not another sister book. It's just that was the characters that came to me. But they go to one of the first wellness retreats in the country, but they're going in part because one of the sisters knows that the woman who founded the retreat it's the early 80s, knows what happened to their mother who went missing when they were teenagers. So this book was my second book as part of a 2-book deal. And so this next book, because I wasn't on a contract timeline, I slowed down. Because with young kids, it becomes very difficult to write a book a year. So I want to be back on my every other year schedule. I like that. I have the hardcover and then the next year is the paperback. And it just gives you a summer in between touring and whatnot. So I worked on it half of last year, and I'll finish it by probably Thanksgiving is my goal. And by finish it, I mean it'll go to my editor and then we'll figure out when we're going to publish it. But I'm assuming it'll come out not next summer, the summer after that. Because that's sort of my choice now. I'm like, okay, now I can make the call myself. You know, they know I can do this, so now I'm going to slow down a little bit. So, anyone else? Yeah.
Do you have a favorite book of yours? And apologies if I missed that.
You didn't miss that.
Okay.
No, that's such
So
a
you
good
have
question.
a favorite of the 4. You said 4, right?
Oh, I thought you were asking like my
Oh,
favorite
well,
book
you
in
can
the
tell
world,
us.
and I was like, oh God, which one do I go with?
No, that's an impossible question. I
It
just
is.
meant out of your 4.
Out of my 4, okay, so I'm not gonna lie, it really is the most recent. I really think we always say that though as a writer because it's so fresh in your mind. But the reason I do believe it's my favorite book is because I think that, and I'm not saying my previous books were not good books, but I think it's my best book. And it's very important to me as a writer to keep growing and know that my craft is getting stronger and my characters are getting sharper and the plot is getting tighter. And I think with this book, it's definitely there, but it's also very close to my heart because it's Martha's Vineyard. It's about a journalist mother, which I can really relate to. You've got the elements of the 3 sisters, which is a part of my life. You know, you've got examining the Gloria Steinem like mother. There's just parts, and there's parts of the story that take place in Washington too, in the halls of the Capitol Hill, and they were great fun to write just from my years reporting down there. So there's a lot of pieces of me in this book, even though there's not really any of me directly, if that makes sense. Yeah. Sure. Anyone else? Are we good?
One more.
Yeah.
I was just
Oh,
gonna
sorry.
ask what you're reading now.
Okay, so that's such a good question. So I just read, so I read A Marriage at Sea by Sophie Elmhurst, which is nonfiction. It's about 2, a husband and wife who are sailing around the world, and they are halfway around when a whale comes up through their boat and cracks it in 2, and they survive for 4 months on a life raft together, and that was excellent. That happened in the 70s. I also just read Beatrice Williams' new book, Under the Stars. I feel like you bought it, right? Do you have it? Yeah. I always will read a good Beatrice Williams book. She's one of my favorite writers. She's now a friend of mine, but like the fact that I can say that gives me like, woo, 'cause I loved her before I was ever wrote fiction. And I recently read a book I loved. Oh, my favorite book of the summer was The Listeners by Maggie Stiefvater. Stiefvater, am I saying that right? Do you know how to say it? No. It takes place in West Virginia at a resort during World War II. And it is about how they housed the German and Italian and Japanese diplomats in these resorts in West Virginia. But it's completely fiction, and it's told through the eyes of the woman who's a local West Virginian who happened to grow up slightly uneducated but rose the ranks and now runs the resort. It is so good. It is so good. I highly, highly recommend it. It's one of my favorites. The Listeners. I don't know if they have it here, but it's
We
this.
don't, but we don't, but we can always order.
Okay, yeah. It's definitely it has this like amazing staircase on the cover that you look down through, and you'll see if you look it up. It's a really good book. Yeah. If you love historical fiction, it's excellent. So
There's like one more in the back and then we're gonna be done.
yeah.
How have you changed in your mind from one novel to the next?
Okay, so they often say, then by they I mean writers and publishers, that there's sort of one story as a writer that you keep coming back to. I don't really know what mine is, but I think part of it is a lot of my stories are about women finding the courage to go to the people they love and ask for what they need. And it sort of comes out in many different iterations in the different books. You know, this is about a nanny on Martha's Vineyard, whereas this is about, you know, an iconic family, so it comes out in different ways. But I think it's just something that I must struggle with in my life, going up to, you know, not just being the people pleaser, the good girl in the family, and sort of saying I need to put myself first right now has been something that's been hard for me. And so I think I'm always kind of,
You almost
even
made
though,
me cry right there.
even though, so you relate. So even though like that's not at all what my books are about, that theme sort of finds its way in. And even with this next book I'm working on, I was like, I am not gonna write anywhere near it. And then I'm like, oh, it's creeping in. I see it happening. It's just there. But I also write a lot about forgiveness and finding yourself, you know, and being nicer to yourself. You know, I think that for me at least, I've always been very ambitious, and I love the people in my life fiercely, and sometimes those two things can rub against each other. There can be tension in those things, and so I think that struggle of being a mom, being a woman, being a sister, being a friend, being a daughter, and the complications of being all those things at once is in all of my books. So, yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you all so much, and thank you to our host.
Yes.
We really